What if I told you that one of the most critical breakthroughs of World War II didn't come from a General S. war room or a scientist S. laboratory, but from a garage mechanic with a welding torch and a notebook full of sketches? While thousands of strategists were planning the invasion of Europe, calculating troop movements and supply lines, they all missed something so obvious yet so devastating. It nearly destroyed the entire D-Day operation. The Allies had the men, they had the equipment, they had air superiority, but they were being stopped not by German super weapons or elite divisions, but by bushes, ancient, overgrown hedgerows that turned France into a graveyard for American tanks. Generals were stumped. Engineers were baffled. The invasion was grinding to a halt. Then a sergeant, a man with no college degree, no military engineering training, walked up to his commanding officer with an idea so crazy, so ridiculously simple, that it seemed like suicide. 48 hours later, that idea would transform the entire war. This is the story of Curtis Culin, the mechanic who refused to believe that impossible problems existed. And what he built in those 2 days didn't just save lives, it rewrote the rules of modern warfare. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about innovation. Act 1. The Crisis, Normandy, France, June 1944. 6 days have passed since the beaches ran red on D-Day. The hardest part should be over. Allied forces should be racing inland, liberating towns, pushing toward Paris. Instead, they're frozen, paralyzed, not by enemy firepower, not by lack of resources, by hedgerows. Now, these aren't the neat garden hedges you trim on a Sunday afternoon. Norman hedgerows are something else entirely: ancient barriers of earth, stone, and tangled root systems that farmers built over hundreds of years to mark their land. Some tower 15 feet high. Their roots plunge 10 feet into the ground. They're essentially natural fortresses, and they blanket Normandy like a maze designed by nature itself. For American tank crews, these hedgerows have become death sentences. Here's the problem: every time a Sherman tank attempts to climb over one of these barriers, it has to tilt upward, and when it tilts, it exposes its belly, the thinnest, most vulnerable part of the entire machine. German soldiers know this. They position themselves on the opposite side with Panzerfaust's handheld anti-tank rockets that can slice through weak armor like tissue paper. They just wait. The moment a Sherman's underside appears over the hedgerow, one shot, one kill. Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron watches this nightmare repeat itself day after day. Tanks approach, tanks climb, tanks explode. Crews burn alive. The medics can't keep up. The body count rises. The tactical situation is becoming desperate. A light command had projected they'd be 30 miles inland by now. Instead, they're crawling forward a few hundred yards per day. Every field is a separate battle. Every hedgerow is a new catastrophe. The Germans don't even need reinforcements. They just hide behind these natural walls and pick off American armor as it exposes itself, one tank at a time. Culin isn't an engineer. He never went to college. Before the war, he fixed cars and trucks in a New Jersey garage. But he understands machines. He understands physics, leverage, force, momentum. And as he watches another Sherman erupt in flames after attempting to crest a hedgerow, something clicks in his mind. The problem isn't the hedgerows themselves. The problem is that tanks are trying to go over them instead of through them. If you could cut through the hedgerow at ground level, plow straight through rather than climb, the tank would never expose its vulnerable underbelly. The Germans couldn't shoot what they couldn't see. But how do you cut through 10 feet of compacted earth, stone, and roots that have been growing for centuries? Culin starts sketching in a notebook he carries everywhere. His crew thinks he's losing it. Culin's at it again, they joke. Going to solve the whole war with his little drawings. They mean it affectionately, but there's skepticism underneath. Plenty of smart people have looked at the hedgerow problem. None have solved it. What makes one sergeant think he can do better? Culin ignores them. He learned a long time ago that people underestimate mechanics. They think working with your hands means you don't work with your brain. But every skilled mechanic is a problem solver. Every repair is a puzzle. You learn to see how systems work, how forces interact, how to make stubborn machinery obey. The hedgerows are just another kind of stubborn machinery. They need to be persuaded, that's all. And Culin thinks he knows exactly how. He just needs a damaged tank, some scrap metal, and an officer crazy enough to let him try. Act 2. The mad experiment. Sergeant Culin approaches his commanding officer, Captain Samuel Morrison, with a proposal that sounds completely insane. He wants to take a damaged Sherman 1 that's been hit but still runs and weld steel spikes to the front. These spikes, cut from German anti-tank obstacles called Czech hedgehogs scattered across the invasion beaches, would act like giant blades. The tank would ram hedgerows at full speed, and the spikes would dig in, tearing through earth and roots to create a path. Captain Morrison stares at him like he's suggested flying to the moon. Let me make sure I understand this, Sergeant. You want to take a tank that's already been damaged, attach scrap metal to it, and then deliberately ram it at full speed into a solid wall of earth. That's your plan? Yes, sir. Culin replies calmly. Right now, our tanks drive over hedgerows and get shot in the belly. My plan keeps the armor facing forward at all times. Germans can't penetrate frontal armor. They need that belly shot. If we never give it to them, they can't destroy the tank. Morrison goes quiet. The logic is sound, but it's still insane. Modifying tanks in a combat zone with untested equipment, if it fails, they lose good tanks and good crews. But if it works, they might actually break through. How long would it take you to build this? Morrison asks. Give me today some welding gear and permission to scavenge metal from the beach obstacles. I'll have a prototype ready. Morrison makes a decision that will alter the course of the entire Normandy campaign. You have 48 hours. If this doesn't work, we're both going to have some very uncomfortable conversations with very angry generals. Culin salutes and gets to work immediately. He requisitions acetylene torches, welding equipment, and a work crew. Then he heads down to the beaches where D-Day began. Those beaches are now littered with German defensive obstacles, the very barriers meant to stop Allied landing craft but were mostly bypassed during the assault. The Czech hedgehogs are perfect for what Culin needs. These are anti-tank obstacles made of 3 heavy iron beams welded together into a massive jack shaped like a children's toy, but made of hardened steel and weighing hundreds of pounds. The Germans planted thousands on the beaches to stop tanks and boats. Now they're just scrap metal, waiting to be repurposed. Culin and his crew cut the hedgehogs apart with torches, working through the night. They trimmed the steel beams to the right length, about 4 feet each. They sharpened the tips. They reinforce every weld. By the end of the first day, they have the prongs ready. Each one as thick as a man's leg and hard as railroad track. The next phase is more delicate. They need to weld these prongs to the Sherman S front without compromising the tank S structure or blocking its movement. Culin calculates angles carefully. The prongs must be low enough to dig into the hedgerow's base, spaced wide enough to rip through a broad section, and strong enough to withstand impact without snapping. You really think this is going to work? Asks Private Eddie Kowalski, one of the welders helping with the project. I know it will, Culin replies, adjusting his welding mask. The physics are solid. Steel teeth driven by 30 tons of tank hitting earth and roots. Something has to give, and it won't be the steel. By dawn on the second day, the modification is complete. The Sherman tank now has 4 steel prongs extending from its front like the tusks of some mechanical beast. Soldiers gather to stare at the strange creation. Some are impressed, others are doubtful. More than a few are placing bets on whether Culin will be court-martialed or commended. Looks like a pig trying to mate with a porcupine, one soldier jokes. Culin pats one of the steel prongs affectionately. Maybe so, but this pig's about to root through every hedgerow between here and Berlin. Captain Morrison circles the modified tank, examining the welds, testing the strength of the prongs. Finally, he nods. All right, Sergeant, you've built your mad contraption. Now you need to prove it works. Tomorrow morning, we're going to find a nice thick hedgerow and see if this thing is genius or suicide. That night, Culin can't sleep. He runs through the calculations over and over in his head. The math works. The engineering is sound, but there's a difference between theory and reality. What if the prongs snap on impact? What if they dig into deep and the tank gets stuck? What if the whole crazy idea just makes things worse? But then he thinks about those burning Shermans, those crews who never made it out. He thinks about how the hedgerows are turning Normandy into a graveyard for American armor. Something has to change. And if his idea works, it could save hundreds of lives. Tomorrow will tell. Act 3. The test. The morning sun has barely risen when Cullin's modified Sherman rolls toward her. Particularly thick hedgerow selected for the test. It's a monster of a barrier 12 feet high, ancient, looking absolutely impenetrable. Several officers have gathered to watch, including Captain Morrison and Major Jack Williams from Division Head. Quarters. The Sherman's crew volunteered for the test. Driver Corporal Jake Mitchell, Gunner Sergeant Tom Harrison, and Loader Private First Class Danny Chen. They're either incredibly brave or completely insane, possibly both. As they button up the hatches and the engine rumbles to life, the gathered soldiers fall silent. Culin stands with the observers, his heart pounding like a drum. Everything he calculated, everything he built, comes down to the next 60 seconds. If it works, they revolutionize the Normandy campaign. If it fails catastrophically, good men might die and he'll be the one who killed them. Ready? Morrison asks, looking at Culin. As I'll ever be, sir. Morrison raises his arm, then drops it the signal to proceed. The Sherman's engine roars louder. Black smoke pours from its exhaust. Then, with gathering speed, it charges directly at the hedgerow. 30 tons of steel accelerating toward an immovable object. The impact is thunderous. The entire tank shudders. Earth explodes outward. Roots snap with sounds like rifle shots. For a moment, the tank seems to stall. Embedded in the ancient mass, soldiers hold their breath. Then slowly at first the Sherman begins to move forward. The steel prongs are working. They're digging deep into the earthwork, creating leverage, ripping through roots and stone. The tank tilts forward slightly, not exposing its belly, but maintaining a nose-down position that keeps frontal armor facing forward. More roots snap. Dirt cascades off the tank's hull. The engine screams with effort. And then, suddenly, the Sherman bursts through the other side of the hedgerow, emerging into the field beyond. The tank has created a perfect breach wide enough for other vehicles to follow, low enough that the vulnerable underside was never exposed. The soldiers erupt in cheers. Culin feels his knees go weak with relief. It worked. His crazy idea actually worked. The Sherman's crew pops their hatches and climbs out, grinning ear to ear. That was the smoothest hedgerow crossing I've ever experienced. Corporal Mitchell shouts, "We barely felt it inside, and we never once exposed our belly to enemy fire." Major Williams approaches Culin, his expression serious. "Sergeant, how many of these modifications can you produce, and how quickly, sir? If I get enough welders and access to more hedgehog obstacles, my crew could modify 10 tanks a day, maybe more if we really push." "Not good enough," Williams says. Cullin's heart sinks, then the Major smiles. "I'm going to get you 50 welders and all the steel you need. Want 100 tanks modified by the end of the week, and I'm sending a report to General Bradley immediately. This invention is going to change everything." Captain Morrison claps Culin on the back. "Congratulations, Sergeant. You're no longer the mad mechanic. You're the genius mechanic who just saved the Normandy campaign." But Culin isn't celebrating yet. "Sir, with respect, one successful test doesn't mean it'll work in combat. We need to try this against an actual German position with real enemy fire. That's the only way to know if it's truly effective." Morrison nods grimly. "I thought you might say that. There's a German strong point about 2 miles from here. They've been holding up our advance for 3 days. Every approach is blocked by hedgerows, and every attempt to cross has been suicide. If your modification works there, under fire, it'll prove your concept beyond any doubt." "When do we go, sir?" "Tomorrow at dawn. I'm assigning you to the tank as technical advisor. You'll ride with Mitchell's crew. If there are problems, you need to be there to see them and understand why." Culin swallows hard. He was hoping to stay back and just build more modifications. But Morrison is right. He needs to see his invention in actual combat. Only then will he know if the design needs improvements. Understood, sir. I'll be ready. Act 4. Combat trial dawn breaks over Normandy with a cold drizzle that makes everything grey and miserable. Culin climbs into the Sherman tank, taking position in the commander's cupola where he can observe and advise the crew. His stomach churns with nervous energy. The plan is straightforward. Their tank, now nicknamed Rhinoceros by the crew, will lead a small column toward the German strong point. They'll use the hedgerow cutter to breach barriers that previously stopped all advances. Infantry will follow close behind, using the breaches to advance without being caught in German killing zones. Mount up. Comes the order. Engines rumble to life across the staging area. The Rhinoceros shudders and begins rolling forward, its steel prongs gleaming in the dawn light. They approach the first hedgerow. Beyond it, according to intelligence, is a German machine gun nest that's been mowing down American infantry for days. The usual tactic would be trying to climb over, exposing the tank's belly to a Panzerfaust that could punch through weak armor like paper. Steady, Culin says over the intercom. Hit it at a slight angle about 20 degrees. That'll help the prongs bite in. Roger that, Corporal Mitchell replies, adjusting their approach. The impact comes with a bone-jarring crash. Earth and roots explode around them. Inside the tank, the crew is thrown forward against their restraints, but nothing breaks. The prongs hold. The tank pushes forward, engines screaming, tracks churning, ripping through centuries-old growth. And then they're through, emerging on the other side to find a shocked German machine gun crew scrambling for their weapon. The Sherman's main gun speaks first. One high explosive round eliminates the threat before the Germans can react. It works. Chen shouts over the intercom. It actually works in combat. But there's no time to celebrate. More hedgerows lie ahead, and behind each one could be enemy troops. The Rhinoceros continues its advance, breaching hedgerow after hedgerow. Each time, the prongs perform perfectly. Each time, the tank emerges before Germans can bring anti-tank weapons to bear. The infantry following behind are ecstatic. For the first time since D-Day, they can advance without being pinned down by hedgerow defenses. They pull through the breaches the tank creates, clearing German positions that seemed impregnable just hours before. Then comes the real test. Intelligence warned them about a German Panther tank, a far more dangerous opponent than infantry, positioned behind a particularly massive hedgerow. The Panther's 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman at long range. If the Rhinoceros gets stuck, breaching the hedge, there'll be a sitting target. Contact front, Harrison calls out. Panther, partial cover behind the hedge. Culin's mind races. They could retreat, call for artillery, play it safe. But that's the old tactics. The whole point of his invention was to change the rules. Breach the hedge, Culin orders. Don't stop for anything. We go through fast and emerge with our gun already aimed where that Panther is. Speed is our advantage. Mitchell doesn't hesitate. The Sherman surges forward. The impact is massive. This hedge is thicker than any they've hit yet. For a terrifying moment, the tank seems to slow, the prongs struggling against the dense mass. More power. Culin shouts, "Give it everything!" The engine howls. Smoke pours from the exhausts. The tracks throw up huge clouds of earth, and inch by inch, the Rhinoceros forces its way through. They burst through the hedgerow at an angle not perfect, but good enough. Harrison kept his gun trained on where the Panther should be, and as they emerge, there it is, turrets still turning to track their unexpected appearance. Harrison fires first. The armor-piercing round strikes the Panther's side armor thinner than its frontal plate, and penetrates. The German tank shudders, smoke pouring from its hatches. Its crew bails out, and the Rhinoceros's machine guns persuade them to surrender rather than fight. The infantry catches up, securing the German prisoners. An officer approaches the Rhinoceros, grinning broadly. "Sergeant Culin, I don't know what kind of witchcraft you worked on this tank, but you just did in 2 hours what we've been trying to do for 3 days. That German strong point is finished." Culin climbs out of the tank, his legs shaky. He did it. The design works not just in a controlled test, but in actual combat against real enemy positions under fire. His mad idea has proven itself. Captain Morrison arrives shortly after, his radio crackling with reports from other units. "Sergeant, I just got word from Division. General Bradley himself wants to see you." Apparently, Major Williams's report made quite an impression. "They're calling your invention the Culin hedgerow cutter, and they want 5,000 of them manufactured immediately." 5,000? Culin can barely process the number. His little modification, built in 48 hours from scrap metal, is going to be mass-produced and deployed across the entire Allied armored force. "Sir, I'm just a mechanic." "I'm not sure you're the man who solved the hedgerow problem," Morrison interrupts. "Own it, Sergeant. You just changed the war." Act 5, Mass Production and Impact. Within days of the Rhinoceros's combat success, every tank depot in Normandy receives orders to begin installing Culin hedgerow cutters. The army brings in welding teams from engineering battalions. They scavenge more Czech hedgehogs from the beaches. They set up assembly lines in fields. Working around the clock, Culin finds himself pulled from his unit and assigned to train welding crews. He travels from depot to depot, showing them the exact angles for the prongs, the proper welding techniques, the reinforcement methods that keep the cutters from snapping under stress. The key, he explains to each new group of welders, is that the prongs have to dig in low to high, and the tank tilts up, exposing its belly, to low, and they just plow dirt without cutting roots. You want them positioned exactly here. He marks the spot with chalk at a 15-degree downward angle. That gives you optimal cutting action. Some welders are skeptical at first. The design looks crude, just steel prongs stuck on a tank. But when they see combat footage of rhinoceros tanks plowing through hedgerows that stopped everything else, skepticism turns to enthusiasm. They work faster, taking pride in the modifications they're installing. General Omar Bradley visits one of the tank modification sites personally. He finds Culin elbow deep in a welding project, training a new crew. Sergeant Culin, I presume. Culin snaps to attention, recognizing the stars on Bradley's collar. "Yes, sir." I tease. "Sergeant, I came to see the man who unstuck my army." Bradley smiles. "Your invention is brilliant in its simplicity. We've been throwing sophisticated engineering solutions at the hedgerow problem for weeks. Artillery barrages, explosive charges, modified bulldozers. Nothing worked consistently. Then you come along with scrap metal and a welding torch and solve it in 2 days. Sir, I just did what needed doing. That's what good soldiers do," Bradley finishes. "I'm recommending you for the Legion of Merit, and I'm also authorizing a field promotion to technical sergeant. This army needs more men who can think outside the box." After Bradley leaves, Cullin's crewmates mob him with congratulations. But Culin feels conflicted. He's being lauded as a genius, receiving medals and promotions. But men are still dying in Normandy. His invention is helping. But it isn't magic. The war is far from over. Private Kowalski, who helped with the original prototype, pulls him aside. "You okay, Sarge? You don't seem too excited about all this." "I am, Eddie. I keep thinking about all the crews we lost before this invention. What if I'd thought of it sooner? What if I'd pushed harder to get it tested?" "You can't think like that," Kowalski says firmly. "You can't save the guys who died before, but you're saving the guys who are still alive. Every day, more tanks with your cutters are rolling through hedgerows. Every day, fewer crews are burning. That's what matters." Culin knows Kowalski is right, but the guilt still gnaws at him. Act 6, Evolution and Unexpected Applications. As Culin hedgerow cutters see widespread use, soldiers in the field begin reporting back with suggestions and modifications. The cutter works brilliantly, but there's always room for improvement. Some crews find that adding a 5th prong in the center improves cutting performance on particularly thick hedgerows. Others experiment with serrated edges that help grip and tear through stubborn root masses. A few creative tank commanders add reinforcement plates to protect the welds from enemy small arms fire. Culin embraces all these modifications. He never claimed his design was perfect, just that it worked. If soldiers in the field can make it work better, he wants to learn from them. The best ideas come from the guys actually using the equipment. He explains to a visiting war correspondent. I came up with the basic concept, but dozens of tank crews have contributed improvements. This isn't just my invention anymore. It belongs to every soldier who's made it better. One particularly clever modification comes from a tank crew in the 3rd Armored Division. They noticed that cutters sometimes get clogged with packed earth and roots, reducing effectiveness on subsequent hedgerows. They had a simple mechanism inspired by agricultural harrow equipment that automatically clears debris from the prongs as the tank moves. It's a small change, but it means tanks can breach multiple hedgerows in succession without stopping to manually clear the cutters.
Culin immediately incorporates this improvement into his training. "See, that's genius right there," he tells welding crews. "I never thought about debris clearance. Some tanker in the field saw the problem and fixed it. That's how good engineering happens, iteratively, with input from the people actually using the product." The German response to the hedgerow cutters is interesting. At first, they seem baffled by the sudden Allied ability to breach hedgerows. German after-action reports captured later in the war show confusion. Enemy armor is now passing through hedgerows without exposing vulnerable areas. Unknown how this is being accomplished. Once they figure out what's happening, Germans try various countermeasures. They reinforce hedgerows with hidden mines. They position anti-tank guns at angles where they might catch breaching tanks. They even create fake hedgerows as traps with pre-positioned anti-tank weapons waiting. But none of these countermeasures work consistently. The fundamental problem remains. The Culin cutter allows tanks to breach hedgerows while keeping thick frontal armor facing the enemy. As long as Allied tank crews use proper tactics, the Germans can't effectively counter the new capability. By August 1944, as Allied forces break out of Normandy and begin racing across France, hedgerow cutters have become standard equipment. New Sherman tanks rolling off production lines in the United States are being manufactured with cutter attachment points already welded in place. The field modification has become an official part of tank design. Culin has literally changed how tanks are built. Act 7. Beyond Normandy. As Allied forces push beyond Normandy into the more open terrain of inland France, the hedgerow cutters see less use for their original purpose. But tankers quickly discover that the cutters have other applications nobody anticipated. In urban warfare, the steel prongs prove excellent for smashing through brick walls and wooden barricades. Tank crews use them to breach buildings where German snipers have taken position. The psychological effect is devastating. The sound of a 30-ton tank crashing through a wall is enough to convince many German defenders to surrender rather than fight. During river crossings, crews find that cutters provide additional traction when tanks have to climb muddy banks. The prongs dig into slippery soil, preventing tanks from sliding backward at critical moments. In winter warfare, cutters help push through snowdrifts that would otherwise bog down vehicles. They act like massive snowplows, clearing paths for following troops. Culin, now a master sergeant attached to an engineering evaluation team, travels to different units to study these creative applications. He takes extensive notes, sketches modifications, recommends design improvements based on field observations. "I never imagined my hedgerow cutters would be used for all this," he writes in a letter home. "I just wanted to get through Norman hedgerows. But soldiers are creative. They'll use any tool for whatever purpose serves them. My cutters have become multi-purpose battlefield tools." The most unexpected application comes during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German forces, launching their last major offensive, create extensive roadblocks using felled trees to slow Allied counterattacks. Tank crews discover that hedgerow cutters can push aside or break through these tree obstacles, allowing armored columns to maintain momentum even when roads are blocked. One after-action report describes a Sherman crew using their Culin cutter to literally push a disabled German tank out of a narrow road, clearing the way for an entire American column to advance. Culin finds that story particularly amusing. "I built a tool to cut through bushes," he says, "and now they're using it to move disabled panzers. War makes you creative, I guess." But not all news is positive. Some tanks suffer equipment failures when cutters are used beyond their design specifications. Prongs snap off when tanks try to push through reinforced concrete obstacles. Welds fail when crews use cutters to try lifting heavy objects. There are even cases of friendly fire incidents when other units don't recognize modified tanks in poor visibility. Culin works with Army engineers to develop better training materials. "The cutter is a tool, not magic," he emphasizes in training sessions. "It has limitations. Use it wrong, and you'll break it or get someone killed. Use it right, and it'll save your life and complete your mission." Act 8. The moral weight of innovation. By early 1945, as Allied forces push into Germany itself, the hedgerow cutter has become so standard that new tankers barely remember a time when Shermans didn't have them. The innovation has become normalized, integrated into doctrine and tactics. For Culin, this is both gratifying and slightly melancholy. His invention succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but success means people forget it was ever a problem. The hedgerow cutters are just there, part of the tank, unremarkable. "That's how you know something really worked," Captain Morrison tells him. "When people can't imagine it ever being different. You didn't just solve a problem, Culin. You made the problem disappear so completely that nobody even remembers it existed." But not everything about the hedgerow cutter's success story is positive. There are costs and consequences Culin hadn't fully anticipated. The first cost is human. When tanks gained the ability to breach hedgerows rapidly, infantry commanders began using armor more aggressively. Some attacks that might have been delayed or canceled in the pre-cutter era were now launched with the expectation that tanks could overcome hedgerow obstacles. This led to some units being pushed into situations where they took casualties that better caution might have prevented. Culin wrestles with this guilt. "Did I give commanders a tool that made them overconfident?" he wonders aloud to Chaplain Thomas O'Brien during a rare moment of reflection.
"You gave them a tool that saved lives," O'Brien replies gently. "What commanders chose to do with that tool, the tactical decisions they made, that's on them, not you. You can't control how people use what you create. You can only try to create things that do more good than harm." There's also the matter of the German defenders. The hedgerow cutters undoubtedly shortened the Normandy campaign, which saved Allied lives. But it also meant German soldiers who might have survived a longer, more cautious Allied advance were instead killed in the more rapid push that the cutters enabled. Culin understands intellectually that this is war. The goal is to defeat the enemy. But emotionally, it's harder to process. "I killed people I never saw," he confides to Kowalski one evening. "Not directly, but my invention put tanks in positions where they could kill more effectively. I'm being decorated for that medals, for making killing more efficient. It feels wrong somehow." Kowalski is quiet for a moment. "You know what feels wrong to me? Watching good men burn in tanks because we couldn't breach hedgerows without exposing ourselves. You stopped that. Yes, your invention killed Germans. It's a weapon modification. That's what it's supposed to do. But it also saved Americans. More importantly, it shortened the war. Every day this war continues, people die, Americans, Germans, French civilians caught in the crossfire. Your invention helped to end it faster. That saves lives on all sides, even if it doesn't feel like it." Culin wants to believe that. He needs to believe that. But the moral calculus of war is never simple. Act 9. Victory and reflection. Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe is over. Culin stands with his unit in a small German town, watching soldiers celebrate. There's joy, relief, exhaustion, emotions too complex to easily name. The hedgerow cutters played their part in the victory. By most estimates, they shortened the Normandy campaign by weeks, possibly months. That acceleration had cascading effects: faster advance across France, quicker liberation of Paris, earlier crossing of the Rhine, soon arrival in Berlin. Every day saved meant lives saved, resources conserved, suffering reduced. Official citations credit the Culin hedgerow cutter with materially contributing to the successful conclusion of the Normandy campaign and subsequent operations in the European theatre. General Eisenhower himself called it one of the most significant tactical innovations of the war. Culin receives the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, and a commendation from the Supreme Allied Commander. He's promoted to warrant officer. His name appears in newspapers back home. He becomes a symbol of American ingenuity, the average soldier who used common sense and scrap metal to solve a problem that stumped experts. But as he stands in that German town watching the celebrations, Culin feels empty. The problem he solved no longer matters. The war is over. The hedgerows of Normandy are a year in the past. His invention, revolutionary as it was, is now just a footnote in the history of a conflict that killed tens of millions. "You're thinking too much again," Kowalski says, appearing beside him with 2 bottles of liberated German beer. "Just reflecting," Culin replies, accepting a bottle. "A year ago, I was welding prongs onto a tank, hoping my idea would work. Now the war's over, and I'm trying to figure out what any of it meant." "It meant you saved lives," Kowalski says simply. "My life? Probably. I was infantry before I got transferred to your welding crew. If I'd stayed infantry, if tanks hadn't been able to breach hedgerows, I'd probably be dead. So, would hundreds of other guys? Your invention mattered, Sarge. Don't ever doubt that." They drink in silence, watching the sun set over a ruined Germany. Culin thinks about all the choices that led to this moment. If he'd dismissed his initial ideas to simple, if Morrison had refused permission, if the first test had failed, if the combat trial had gone wrong, any one of those moments could have changed everything. No. What's strange, Culin says after a while. I keep thinking about German tankers. They were sitting behind hedgerows, confident they were safe. Then suddenly American tanks